Welcome to Not Another CEO podcast. I'm your host, David Politis. Every week, we talk to inspiring leaders and get the true stories, the ups and downs, the lessons learned, and come away with actionable advice for our own journeys. Today's guest is revolutionizing the food industry. His product has been on Oprah's favorite things list. The company was on Fast Company's most innovative companies list 2 years in a row. They've been called the best meal delivery service, a crucial gadget every home cook needs, and much more. A self-professed food nut, he has a history working in the food industry and has dedicated himself to transforming the culinary world. Please welcome co-founder and CEO at Tovala, David Rabie. Hey, David.
Hey, thanks for having me.
I'm really excited. Let's get right off the bat. First question: what's one thing that you've done at Tovala, big or small, that's had the biggest impact, and you'll absolutely do again in the future if you're CEO of another company?
Yeah, so from day one almost, I've been sending a weekly email to every team member at the company, talking about what's on my mind, what are the most important things we need to get done, sharing information about new hires, about new things we're trying. And, more than anything, that has helped me on a weekly basis reflect on what is the most important thing? What do I want to communicate to the team? What do I want people really thinking about? And has also kept people informed on what's happening across the company. And these emails have evolved in a huge way, as you can imagine, from when we were 3 team members sitting around a table together to now being several hundreds. But we've kept it up, and I have sent a weekly email every week for nearly the last 10 years. And the weeks in which I'm out, I'll have someone else on my executive team send it. But we haven't missed a Monday really ever outside of maybe the Christmas week where we're all off.
Wow. And I have a long list of questions here. First question is, how long are these emails?
Yeah, I'd say they can be as short as 2 paragraphs of what's on my mind. And sometimes they will be, 2 or 3 pages if we've got long updates on hiring or on new product things, or we're sharing folks that got promoted. But I'd say in general, they're probably about a page.
And then do you write the whole email yourself, or do other people write parts of it, or does someone compile all of it? Because I've done these emails. They are at least for me, they I would like have to work a whole weekend to like write the email in a way where I felt like ready to send it. Like how do you actually put it together?
Yeah, that's a good question. I do most of the writing. And then if there are sections in which I know we want information about a very specific topic that someone else is leading or closer to, I'll send them a note and ask them to write a draft for me. So let's say we've hired someone new. I'll ask their manager to send me a quick 3 to 5 sentence bio of that person, and then I'll drop that in. But I'd say most of the kind of more subjective things that are in the email are exclusively for me.
Do you have do you have concerns that you're going to put something in this email and someone will just forward it into, I mean, is there confidential information in the emails?
Yeah, there is sometimes. I will say, as the company has gotten much bigger, um, I sometimes will think twice about sending certain sensitive things. We do, personally really believe in transparency. And I think philosophically, I think if you trust people, they tend to reward that trust back. But, certainly I looked back at the emails that I sent in 2016 when there were 5 of us, and I was sharing lots of personal information and, really, really sensitive information about investor relations and fundraising. And, yeah, I think there's a little less of that now for sure. But I think the kind of core message of what's on my mind, what's important, I don't hold back. And, this is a little less with the message to our team. But when we send updates to our investors, I do assume that could get forwarded. And that's in the back of our minds for sure, that this will probably leave the walls of Tovala.
You said investors there. Is it the same? Do they get the same email that your employees get every week, or do they get a different version of that?
Yeah, they get a very different version. It's once a month, but similar to the team email, we have been doing that basically since day one. So from when we raised our first $500,000 pre-seed round at the end of 2015. We've been sending a regular monthly update to all of our investors, and kind of evolved in the same way that at the beginning, it was literally just what's on my mind. And over time, once we launched and we had metrics, they started to become a little more metrics driven. And then as the business scaled and went from a kind of really nascent startup to a more real functioning business, the finance team started to play a much bigger role in those updates. So yeah, I'd say those updates are quite different. Maybe the kind of big macro point of what is most important and what's on my mind will be in both, but the content of the investor updates is quite different than what we share with the team.
It would be amazing in whenever whatever ends up happening with the company and wherever you end up taking it, you could basically just take the emails and publish them as is, and that would probably tell the entire story of it. Would be a really interesting way to understand the story of the company.
Yeah, it would tell a huge part of the story. I'd say probably the one element that is not in those is some of the challenges around people that we've had that are just too sensitive to include broadly. But I'd say kind of the arc of the company and the things that were most important and the things that were working and not working for sure get captured between those two audiences.
Yeah, that's amazing. Let's talk about the company itself, and maybe can you just I did the intro, but maybe you could just talk a little bit more about what does the company do exactly, and then I have a bunch of questions about how you got to where you are today with the product.
So we make two products that actually work hand in hand. One is a countertop smart oven. You can think of it like a standard toaster oven that's got a lot more bells and whistles. And then the other is a prepared meal delivery service. And those two work together. So the meals arrive, they get shipped to your doorstep. They arrive fresh. Most of the ingredients in those meals are actually completely raw. So we do some par cooking of ingredients, but the majority of what goes in the meals is raw. So raw chicken breast, salmon, pork chop, vegetables, dry grains, etc. And that's where the magic happens in that we're not asking you to do the cooking. We're asking you to do 30 seconds of preparation, maybe add a spice mix, add a little water. Then you put your food in the oven that we've built. You scan a QR code. The oven is Wi-Fi connected, so it downloads the cooking instructions for that meal, and then it cooks it perfectly every time. You walk away, 20 minutes later, you get a push notification and your meal will come out piping hot, perfectly cooked because we've architected every part of that journey from the perfect specifications for your chicken breast to the perfect temperature for that meal to be cooking at over the course of the 20 minutes and kind of everything in between that.
So fully vertically integrated, like the actual hardware you manufacture and the food, and you get that food to the customer, all of that.
So we develop the recipes ourselves. We make all the food ourselves in our own food facilities. We've designed and developed the oven, but we don't manufacture the oven. So the man that makes the oven for us. We've made the software, we've made the firmware, all the packaging we've developed, and then we actually don't handle the logistics. So once the product leaves our food facilities, we rely on lots of different partners to get the product into your home.
So when you started the company, was this the vision from day one to have hardware, software, food? Was that vertically integrated? Was that the vision from day one?
Pretty much. I'd say what was not as clear is like which of those would we own versus partner, but the product idea that we need to control the food, the hardware, and the software was true. And I'd say that's probably most acute on the food side. And some of the early days we were debating whether we could find someone else to make the food for us because that's a huge capital intensive undertaking. And pretty quickly early on realized that that just wasn't feasible. Part of our value proposition is that the menu changes every week. And so to find a partner that would be willing to create new recipes at scale every single week, uh, hold the same high quality standards as us, do it at really low volume so they're not going to make any money, like that doesn't exist. And so that option was quickly weeded out early on. We did rent space from another food company in our early days versus having our own dedicated space, but it was our own team that was doing all of the preparation. Uh, but yes, like largely the vision has held. We have not had a massive pivot at all.
And when you started, was it day one you launched? And because from my understanding, from what I've read and from our conversations, seems like the business now is doing amazing. Your customers love it. I mean, it the reorder rate, all the like it sounds amazing. Was it like that literally like you launched and everyone it just took off?
Not exactly. So we launched. I think we internally were really sipping our own Kool-Aid. We got some amazing press when we launched. We launched in July of 2017. We were on the front page of the Wall Street Journal, both the actual physical paper and the website with a glowing review. Yeah, it was amazing. And the customers that had the product loved it. And we had done a Kickstarter campaign. So we'd had hundreds of customers that had already tried it and were ordering meals, and the reviews were amazing. The retention was really strong. But then when we launched, even with all that press, we were not selling nearly enough units, nowhere near what our expectations were or our investors'
Mm.
expectations. And it took us, so we launched in July of 17. It wasn't until September of 19 that we really unlocked the kind of step change function in growth. And for us, we defined that as finding product market fit. We had one part of the product figured out once it was in your home. A wide array of people loved it, but getting it into the home was a huge challenge, and one that took over 2 years to really figure out.
Wow. And 2 years, I am assuming with this kind of business, I've not been in this kind of business, but I assume it's very capital intensive, right?
Correct. Correct. Yes.
And so how do you keep your investors excited, I guess?
Yeah. It's a great question. So when we launched, the feedback we'd gotten and we'd launched post a seed round, the Series A investors we had talked to had said, really just proved two things. One, can you make this business just function because it's so complex? Like, is the hardware going to burn people's homes down? Is the food going to get people sick? Are we going to scan these codes and are they actually going to work? Like, it's a lot of moving pieces. So that was kind of goal number one. Goal number two, prove that you can retain customers at a really healthy clip. And if you can do those two things, that should be enough to raise a Series A. And then from there, you go figure out how you can go market the thing. And so we did those two things, but a couple things happened around that time that really changed and moved the goalposts. One was that Blue Apron went public, and that really soured investors on the kind of broader meal kit space because their IPO went really poor and some of their retention metrics started to filter out. And it just kind of soured people on this kind of D2C meal delivery space, began the souring. And the second was that there was a company called Juicero that made, call it a Keurig for
Oh
juice.
yes, yeah, I
So
remember that. Yeah, yeah.
really expensive juice press, organic vegetables and fruits. And around the time we were raising our Series A, it came out that you didn't actually need the machine to squeeze the packs. And that, the company ended up failing shortly thereafter. And they had raised well over $100 million. And so the combo of those two things, and Amazon also bought Whole Foods around this time, like it very quickly changed investor sentiment. And we went from, really hot category and feeling like we were going to have a great fundraise to a much more challenging fundraise. Fortunately, we had a bunch of existing investors that were larger investors and not actually seed investors. And so one, Origin Ventures, they stepped up and led our Series A. And then we had a bunch of insiders that participated and brought on a couple new folks. And we did that off the backs of the early retention and engagement data. So growth was not really part of that story. And those investors were okay with that. So the real challenge was about 18 months after that, when we tried to go raise a Series B and we were not growing very fast. And we failed to do it. And we were lucky that our existing investors bought what we were selling, that, hey, we're going to figure this out. Here's our plan. Here's our strategy. We've made a ton of improvements on the margin side of the business. So the business will have a path to profitability. And they kind of took a leap. And then after, it was probably 3-4 months after that, that things really started to hum.
And when you think about the product and the evolution of the product and how involved are you as a CEO? There's different kinds of CEOs, and it's interesting in these interviews that you're getting. I get a sense of like the types of CEOs. Like, are you in the weeds on every food, every recipe, and are you in there doing that, or is that do you have a team that does that, and it's really about operating the business, scaling the business? Like, where do you spend your time?
Yeah, I've generally focused on operating the business. In the early days, I was definitely way more involved on the product side. But even in the early days, my philosophy was to hire great people and give them autonomy and let them drive their roadmaps with some direction and guidance from me. And that's how we got off the ground. What was a pretty complex business, I'd say, with not a ton of people. We'd raised like a little less than $4 million to get the business off the ground. Um, and the way we did that was not by, we didn't hire a ton of people. So that was my kind of core management philosophy. And I think that has helped me scale as a leader, as I haven't really struggled with kind of pulling out of the weeds. I will say when we're doing really net new product things, then I like to get really involved. Um, but when it's kind of the ongoing incremental improvements and things like that, I'm not as in the weeds.
How big is the company people wise today?
We're about 400 people.
Wow. All over, or is it centralized somewhere?
Yeah, so our corporate team for the most part is in the Chicagoland area, although we have spread out. So there's definitely pockets of people across the country. And then we've got 3 food facilities, 2 in Illinois, and then 1 in Utah. And so we've got a pretty big hub of people, our production team, some folks on the operations team, and a couple others, our CFOs out there in Utah, and then kind of a smattering across the rest of the US.
Let's talk about hiring, because you mentioned that how important that's been to you and having this team. You know, when you started with your hiring, were you bring people in who had experience in the food industry and understood the space, or were you bring people in hiring for kind of, potential, let's say, and has that changed over time?
Yeah, that's a great question. We were definitely hiring for potential early on. And I think that was probably mostly right, but also maybe a little naive. And we were very much inclined to hiring entrepreneurial type folks. So we had a number of people that had started their own companies, whether product based or service based companies. So that really helped us. Yeah. We hired a lot of young people. I'd say kind of average age was mid-20s, mid to late 20s. And I'm kind of generalizing, but this is the first 15 or so employees, 20 employees. And then as we scaled, we brought people on with more experience. The other thing I'll add, we had a few folks with more experience early on, but I was not afraid of hiring people from other industries and bringing them in to our industry. And interestingly, I have gotten a little more wary of that, even though that worked for us early on. Uh, Now I'm kind of like, well, let's get someone that has done this exact thing before. But early on, we were a little more open to that. And we've also had a lot of people in the life of the organization start in this function and end up in this kind of completely different function and do so really successfully. But yeah, as we've scaled, we have hired people with more experience, people that have come from successful companies within the kind of 3 year ish functions that we or businesses that we oversee. If you think about hardware, software, and food, uh, and that has helped. But we've made some mistakes for sure as we've scaled.
The entrepreneurial people that you had, in my experience, when as I also hired for potential in all the companies I've been a part of, and at some point it almost feels like those people hit the ceiling when the company gets bigger and maybe more, the roles become more specialized. And like, of those 15 people you brought on, those people, former founders, how many of those people have been with the business still to this day?
Yeah, out of the first 15 or 20, we probably have almost 10 still with
That's a
us.
lot.
Yeah, plus or minus. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And I'd say most of them have just found a way to grow and evolve with the company really successfully. And the ones that are, not as good with rules and structures, we found ways to like put them in roles that benefit the company and kind of capitalize on their strengths without it creating any sort of weird dynamic or precedent or anything like that. And then I will say we have a number of early stage hires that have scaled really well with the company and have become good people managers, have grown their remit relative to the company today. Whereas, compared to what they were doing day one, their remit was much wider. But yeah, we have a bunch. We have a bunch that, and I'd say kind of a unifying trait in all of those is a real growth mindset and wanting to invest in themselves and evolve as the company has evolved. And what that's, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to ask you, was there something in the interview process that, or some question you would ask that would, because I think I find that actually in a good way for you rare that you can take those people and they can grow and they have that growth mindset and they even as the company grows. Was there something you looked for or a question you asked or something that you think let you identify these people? Do they come from some source, some feeder?
It's a good question. No, they're kind of the people that I have in my head came from completely different walks of life. Uh, I'll tell you kind of two unifying traits across all of them. They're all exceedingly humble and all very hungry. And those are probably two of the three most important things we looked for in people back then. We still really look for that. And to me, it's a really powerful combination where you get the ambition and the drive and the hunger, but you don't get the ego. And those two words probably describe our culture maybe better than any two others. And I think they describe some of our best early people that we hired.
When did you stop interviewing kind of every person that, how far did you go when you were still interviewing everyone?
Yeah, I went pretty far. I think it was probably 2021. So 6 years in, we were hundreds of people. I wasn't interviewing production team members, but anyone that was joining on the corporate team, even production managers, I was interviewing, and I would be the final interview for roles that were pretty far removed. But um, yeah, I think maybe it was the Airbnb guys that spoke to us. We went through Y Combinator and they came to one of the dinners and maybe it was them that said, at that point one of them was still interviewing people. And I remember that sinking in my brain. And, as crazy as it sounds in hindsight, I think it was a mistake to stop. Um, I should have continued doing that because I think we made a bunch of mistakes on hiring and just assumed that, everyone in the organization would kind of learn and those skills would transfer down. Um, and I think we made some mistakes that humbly, maybe I think I could have helped avoid. But again, it was getting, especially as the business was scaling super fast, it started to become a little crazy that, the team had to find 30 minutes for me to interview someone.
Well, you become the bottleneck, right? I mean, you end up the bottleneck.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was the reason why I stopped. So I've gotten a little more involved now. We're hiring, but not nearly as fast. And so with all roles now, someone on the executive team will interview at a minimum. Um, and then I've been interviewing more people than in the past.
So one of the lessons that I reflected on when I stopped operating about a year ago was how very few people ever really get trained on how to interview. So when you think about it, you put someone on your team who's amazing, one of those first 20 people, whatever, and you put them in the room and they've only ever been on the other side of the of the table. And actually, as I've been working with a bunch of early stage companies and I asked them, have you ever trained that person how to interview? No. And I didn't either. And you actually have this reflection of I don't know if anyone ever. Not a lot of people invest in that.
It's funny you bring that up. I did a training for our team. I did it twice in the first 2 years because I had the same realization. And I thought I'd made a bunch of good hires. And I'm like, well, let me show everyone what I'm doing. And so I wrote up this like 4-page document. And then we had a couple all hands meetings. There weren't a lot of us, 20 of us, 15 of us. And I walked everyone through like, these are the traits I look for. These are the questions I ask. These are the flags I'm looking for. Um, and I think it really helped because I think your point is right. Many of our team members had never been on the other side of the table.
Yeah, it's I actually I would interview people like I don't think I got that far when we were interviewing everyone that size, but sometimes people would say to me, "How did you find that out?" I asked a bunch of questions, but that person never said that thing. And I said, "Well, I asked it a little bit in a different way." And then the next interview they would do, they said, "Oh, I did that same thing and it worked." And so I think it's a big lesson for me, and I push on a lot of founders like take the time to actually share with the team how you do it, what you look for. So that's interesting. Let's talk about fundraising because you have raised quite a bit of money. It is a cash intensive, it's a cash intensive business. Have you went through Y Combinator? Was that really like the catalyst to get you off the ground? Like I have not been through Y Combinator. I haven't even worked with a company that's been through Y Combinator, so I don't have the I don't understand that other than what I've read. Can you walk through that process, that experience, and do you think that that was like having that stamp? Was that did that put you on a different trajectory? I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, if we rewind before Y Combinator, we went through the New Venture Challenge, which is a business plan competition at the University of Chicago's business school at Booth. And that was kind of the first training ground, I will say, for me on how to pitch investors. And it's kind of a 2.5 month long competition. And there's a lot of practicing of pitching in front of investors. So that helped, I think, from a storytelling and materials and all kind of the blocking and tackling you have to do to go raise money. That really helped me. And it opened some doors for us for sure, but not all doors were open, undoubtedly. And I think the program has actually got much, much better in the last 10 years as well, and grown kind of in the amount of people that know it. But part of the reason we decided to go to YC was to open a lot more doors and yes, get a stamp that kind of every VC would know and would help us with hiring and all those things. So we applied twice. I got in the second time and went through in the winter of 2016. So about 8.5 years ago. And we moved, we got a house in Silicon Valley, and I actually didn't talk to investors for the first 2.5 months we were there. And that was on the direction of YC. They tell you, like, don't talk to investors. They're going to want to talk to you. Just focus on building your product and talking to customers. And so that's what we did. And then after YC, you do this big demo day, pitch in front of, first you pitch in front of all the alums, and then you pitch in front of hundreds of investors. Um, yeah, the alums are meant to be kind of a safer space and, smaller checks, if you will. Obviously now, like, some of the alums are extremely rich.
Yeah, yeah.
And that was true even 8 years ago, but probably less so than it is today. And also today, I think they're, live streamed. And at the time it was all in person. So it was actually a really cool experience. You're in an auditorium with hundreds upon hundreds of people. And then with, every well-known investor in the world wants to go to this thing. So that was also an amazing experience. And we thought it would be just this like feeding frenzy. We'd do the demo day and we'd raise $2 million the next 48 hours and then pack our bags and go back to Chicago. But it took us 2 months to raise $1.5 million. And some of that came through YC, but a lot of it came through our own networks and through the Midwest and things like that. So there was just a lot of skepticism around hardware, especially consumer hardware, and the complexity of our business. There was some early skepticism developing around the category, but it was still really early. The category was still hot. But yeah, we struggled. We had peers that for sure raised millions of dollars within a day or two, and that was not us. But it's a crazy experience. Like, the day after demo day, you're just going, across Sand Hill Road and in San Francisco, and it's everyone in the back. Like, you're seeing your batchmates like waiting outside, and then you're next. And it's like every, 120 companies all raising money at the same time, all seed stage. It's kind of a bizarre phenomenon.
Wow. And do you go back to the alum thing, or
I don't. Sometimes I'll watch online, but I'm not as involved. And I think some of that is just a consequence of geography. Like, being in Chicago, it's a little harder to be super involved with YC, but they invested in the business beyond that first 120K we got. And so we'll talk to them from time to time and stay posted. And it's a great network to be a part of for sure.
yeah, I can imagine. I feel like, there's some things that are a forcing function in those kinds of programs, and it sounds like the same thing that you did pre that, like, just that do set you up for, um it kind of shortens the learning curve, I guess, and a lot of that early period of time. Like, for me, pitching, I didn't know how to pitch by myself when I found a better cloud, and so I'm going into these pitches, and I was pretty bad, and you realize that if I had the reps somewhere in a safe place, then I'm already just I'm hitting the ground running versus like learning on the job, I guess, So
100%. 100%. Yeah. Both of these places, they ran you through the ringer. Like, you get up, you give your pitch, they give you tons of feedback. You do it again, you do it again, you do it again. And that works.
did you meet your co-founder as part of the YC process, or was that from before?
No, no. We met before. Yeah. We met, about almost a year before we went through YC, and his name's Brian Wilcox. He was running his own product development company when we met. So they were building all sorts of connected products for small companies and big companies. And initially, we actually met on the idea that I would hire his firm to do some of our early R&D work. We had our concept, we had an early business model, business plan, but not much, like no customers or anything. And we took a liking to each other and we really connected as humans. And as I was trying to fundraise as the solo founder of a pretty tech involved business, I was getting, really credible feedback that outsourcing the technology and not having tech in house and not having a co-founder that was technical, like odds of success were just much lower. And I knew that I was looking for a co-founder, but that's a very hard thing to do and find. And so I shared all that with Brian over the course of this is the summer of 2015. And he was the one that took the leap of faith and said, "Hey, what if I come on board full time, join as your co-founder and CTO?" And so we kind of crash dated. We like to joke over the course of a couple weeks, met each other's spouses, talked philosophically about what we wanted from the company and what our goals were, the kind of culture we wanted to build. And even though we came from very different upbringings and backgrounds, we saw eye to eye on a lot of things, and we kind of jumped in together, and it worked out. We were really lucky. I don't think that's like the right formula for finding a co-founder. We had known each other for like 4 or 5 months, not that long, but it worked out great. And so yeah, we went through YC together. It was actually his push that encouraged us to go. I was kind of on the fence, and he really wanted to, and it was the right call.
Now, for you as CEO, have you reached, let's say, breaking points at different stages of the business in terms of your own skills? Have you naturally just evolved? Because seems like, again, based on our conversations, what I can see, what I can read, what I've read online, you're a pretty amazing operator. Is that just natural to you? Is that from your previous experience, or is that something you work at?
Well, I appreciate the kind words. I think we could definitely be doing better in a lot of things, but yeah, on the whole, we've done all right. Um, yeah, I think it's probably a little bit of both. I've tried to really invest in myself by leaning on mentors, learning from our board, learning from peers, joining different CEO groups, reading a ton. Um, so I think I've tried to really invest in myself. I always wanted to be an entrepreneur. So I feel like I've been kind of studying for this journey my whole life. And I did a lot of entrepreneurial things when I was younger. Uh, and then I think some of it is innate. I think some of it is like my own temperament, the kind of person I am, I think is really well suited to this role and the roller coaster parts of the journey. And um, like I said, in many ways, some of the things that I know founders struggle with at scale come to me really naturally and have from day one. And so I think that's really helped as the business has evolved and gotten bigger. I haven't struggled with some of the normal pitfalls, I would say.
What is the biggest challenge you've faced at the company ever, and how have you overcome that? Were you able to overcome that?
Yeah, there's moments in time challenges, which is what I'll talk about here. And then there's kind of broader strategic challenges, which I kind of alluded to earlier, that it took us 2 years to find product market fit. That was probably the hardest 2 year span for the company. But there was a moment in time where we had signed a term sheet for our Series B. This is in 2020, and it came apart at truly the 11th hour, the day before it was supposed to close. And this was February of 2020. And the pandemic was starting to become a real thing. The stock market had collapsed the week that our term sheet came apart. I think the Dow fell 10,000 points in those 5 days. This is the end of February of 2020. And the term sheet came apart actually having nothing to do with the pandemic. There were other reasons it came apart that also had nothing to do with Tovala. And we had about 3 weeks of cash in the bank. So it was a pretty terrible, to put it mildly, moment. We had a brand, it was our first child was born about 4 weeks before that. So we had a newborn in the house, and this kind of looming pandemic that no one knew what it was going to mean or what it was going to do for your livelihood, your health, business, et cetera. And yeah, that was the one night where I remember wanting to give up, probably in the life of the company. I've had many, many hard moments where I'm frustrated and can't believe it. And this was the one night where I just felt pity for myself and wanted to throw in the towel. And then by the morning when I'd woken up, I'd kind of pulled myself together, but that was truly the closest we have come to dying once there was kind of a real business in place. And we found a way. We found a way to survive. And now that story is part of company lore. And I think we have a value at Tovala called embrace the obstacles. And in many ways that moment embodies that value, that the team rose to the occasion. We ended up raising enough capital to keep everyone's jobs together. And we rallied and really used that to come together as an organization. And now we use it as an example of, hey, you think this is hard. Remember when we went through that crisis in 2020 and survived to tell the story.
Did you have to lay people off in that process to deal with the cash?
We did it. This happened on a Thursday night, and we spent basically like Friday afternoon through Sunday night on the phone with every single one of our investors, trying to raise $25,000 checks. This was going to be a $20 million round. And I mean, I think we were even taking $10,000 checks, like whatever we could raise. And the crazy thing was we had never been more bullish on the business. The business was on fire. It was growing so fast. And our investors knew that. And really the only thing precluding them from readily giving us more money was this looming pandemic. And no one knew, people were putting money under their mattresses. Like no one knew what was going to happen. And so that's what we had to help, get them over. And I think for most of our investors, it was a leap of faith and probably some feeling like this is not right, what's happening. And we need to help this company survive. But by Monday morning, we had raised $2 million and that had bought us several months, 3, 4 months, 5 months. And so we got up in front of the whole company. We called it emergency, all hands, every function, production teams, and shared a much longer, kind of more transparent version of this story, exactly what happened behind the scenes. And as I said, used it as a rallying cry and told everyone we're going to go raise this round of funding again, which we did. We raised the Series B, $20 million Series B, all in, including that bridge round. And the business kept scaling.
When you talk about it, especially like that company lore, I do think it's so powerful, especially for the people who are around that were there at that point, because, it's like, I find these kinds of things, like when you tell your children, about the grandparents, the great grandparents, where your family comes from and what they had to do to get to this country, or what they had to do to survive. And I think for companies, actually, it's a similar thing where some people could join today and be like, this company is crushing it. Everyone knows it, but they don't know actually what you had to get through in order to be here. And I think it is really powerful when you have something like this to point to,
I do a monthly story time with every new hire class and walk them through the company journey and really focus a lot on the moments of existential threat or crisis or huge obstacles, just to help a little bit with the challenge that you just said, which is real, that people come in and are like, this thing's a machine. It just works and it's great. And, want to give people a little bit more insight into how we got to this point.
Have you ever talked to the investor who pulled that term sheet?
Yes, there's a much longer story there. I have. Yeah, actually, we think very highly of them, but which is kind of crazy to say without all the context. But yes, we are very close to them now, actually.
They're probably upset that they didn't do that. That they didn't do that round. And I was actually, so the early days, that was February, March. I mean, I was fundraising during that time. That was, you couldn't be in a worse fundraising environment ever, including what we've been going through the last couple of years. Because people literally thought, I had one existing investor, call me and say, just stop paying every bill. If someone offers you $1 million, sell the company. Like, it was like, the world's going to end. And so I know that feeling. Out of curiosity, for your business specifically, was the pandemic, I don't want to say good, but was it actually because people were at home, and I think a lot of people wanted to, figure out what to do about food and healthy food. Like, was it actually a boost at the end of the day for you?
For sure, it was a boost. We didn't really start to see that boost, I think, until early April. And so when we were trying to re-raise that round in March, it was hypothetical. And we were trying to tell people, hey, this might be good, but that didn't land with a lot of investors. We got a verbal offer like March 12th, and then it got pulled March 13th or 14th. And that was right around the time the pandemic, the day that the NBA shut down and Tom Hanks got COVID, like that was the day we got the verbal. And then the next day it got pulled. Because that was the day it started to feel real. I think for everyone, it was like one thing when it was, the economy was struggling and there's rumors of what this thing is. But then when these major figures and organizations are taking huge steps to react, all of a sudden people are like, oh my God, this thing is here. So, uh, yeah, that part was really hard. But then come April, demand started to really grow. And yeah, I mean, the business tripled in size in 2020. And it's hard to say what would have happened without the pandemic because we were already growing really fast. We had been growing for about 8 months. But the pandemic was more fuel. And we're fortunate in that we didn't overinvest in infrastructure and inventory and things like that in a way that I think some other peers did, unfortunately, just because it was really hard to understand what demand would look like 2, 3, 4 years down the line. But um, we opened a big new facility that was, even in hindsight was the right decision because the business was growing so fast.
What are you most excited about for the future of Tovala?
I think there's so much changing with people's relationship with food across the country in lots of ways. Obviously there's been just a gradual trend towards people eating healthier, but if you think about the trend towards convenience, trends towards health, there's a lot happening with these GLP-1 drugs that are changing people's relationship with food. There's just a lot changing around how people consume food at home. And even though we launched 7 years ago, we still feel like we are at the forefront of delivering a really unique experience in the home. Like we control the way the food is cooked in your home, but we're not asking you to do any work. That we think is a powerful value proposition that's not going to become any less valuable. And that some of these new trends we think could be really, really good for us. So we're very excited about the future. And I think, also hopeful that the capital markets will get a lot better. And that we've been, fortunate to be able to navigate the last couple of years successfully.
Great. Let's talk a little bit about your background. Where you said before you always wanted to be an entrepreneur. Where does that come from?
Yeah, I think it comes from my family. My dad started his own business. I had uncles and great uncles that started their own companies, and so I grew up. That was kind of the only thing I knew. I didn't have family members that had navigated corporate America, and so that was never of interest to me. I always wanted to start my own really big business, and I was really entrepreneurial as a young kid, starting different side hustles and just starting things. I think I get a lot of juice out of creating something from nothing. And I never knew what I wanted to do, what kind of business. The only thing I liked as a kid was sports and making money, but sports. But I didn't know what my passion was going to be. And then I found a passion for food and health and wellness right before I started college. And so after that, it became kind of clear, okay, I want to do something professionally with this. And, ultimately after a bunch of different kind of more odd entrepreneurial jobs, I ended up starting Tovala and kind of bringing all those things together
What did your father do? What kind of business did he have?
in real estate. So he started his own home building business.
Okay. Did you work with him did you go with him?
Yeah, a little. Like as a kid, I would go to the properties, and where he was doing his projects were pretty far from where we lived, like an hour or two commute. So yeah, I would go with him from time to time, and I interned in the industry for a while, and real estate never spoke to me uh, the way it did to him, and the way food does to me. But as I've gotten older, I've gotten more of an appreciation for it as a business. It's a lot less sexy than what I do, but also a lot more stable and predictable. So I see the allure of it for sure.
What was your best side hustle as a kid? What was your best
I taught myself how to trade stocks when I was in sixth grade. Uh, this was the dot-com boom, and I just got really into it. I just had a bar mitzvah, and so I had a few $100, and my dad let me he'd set up like an E-Trade account. So I started trading stocks, and I'd wake up really early on the West Coast before the market opened and study and whatever. Then I learned how to trade options, and that's when things got really exciting. as a 13-year-old, and there was so much volatility in the market because of all these .com companies going bust. And I turned, I think it was $2,500 or $3,000 into almost 30,000 as a 13-year-old. Yeah, it was insane. And I ended up losing about half of that and then calling it quits and really never trading stocks again. But that was probably the craziest.
That's amazing. That's like, I think that's an amazing. I wonder, what did your parents think? Like that whole.
Yeah, my mom I know has shared that she was not happy. She was really concerned that I wouldn't understand the like value of money or the value of hard work because I was just kind of clicking buttons. And one morning I made $10,000 on a trade, and then I went off to seventh grade that morning. So yeah, I don't think they were particularly happy. Maybe on the one hand, but I think there was also probably some pride.
That's an amazing story. Um, what it's the first time actually people have given me different stories, but not like as side jobs, but not like that, like lemonade stands, but not trading stock. That's good. What when you think about like this job, being a CEO, being a founder, for sure, it's hard. And you know, you mentioned you have a family. Like, how do you balance everything? How do you balance the family with the work, with everything that you have to do?
Yeah, couple things I'd say. Fred Wilson has this blog post that he wrote a long time ago, maybe 8 years ago, 9 years ago, and it's called "The Job of a Founder CEO," and it struck such a chord with me. It's like one of the few articles that I can remember and I share all the time. And he basically was like, at the end of the day, founder CEOs have three jobs. One is to set the vision, two is to hire great people, and three is to not run out of money. And if you do those three things really well, they kind of build on each other. If you set the vision, you're kind of telling people where to go. If you hire great people, they'll lead you there. And as long as they have enough money to keep their jobs and invest in what they need to do, they can execute. And that stuck with me. And I still view that as kind of my core job. And I think that has helped me with balance and ensure that I'm not spending my time on things that maybe are not the highest value add. So I think that's one. Probably two, I read John Doerr's book many years ago. Sorry, not John Doerr, Andy Grove's book. And one of the things that stuck with me from his book, and he's like one of the most revered CEOs in Silicon Valley, is he like always left the office at 5 o'clock and went home for dinner with his family. Like he worked a 45 hour week consistently. And, for sure there were periods where he probably had to work a lot more, but that was his norm. And I remember just thinking like, wow, this guy is like one of the most revered leaders and managers. And he wasn't working 100 hours a week for 10 years straight. And so that opened my eyes a little bit to like, maybe there is a way to be in this seat and not have to burn the midnight oil for 10 years straight. And then couple that with the fact that family is super important to me, mental and physical health are really important to me. And so I found a way to like make space for all those things. And still, I believe, do my job super effectively.
Did you Were you able to do that day one? Like, were you able to do that when you were?
It was less important day one because I had less responsibilities. My wife was my girlfriend, and she had a really stressful job and was working a ton. And so it for sure was still investing. Like I was exercising every day because I thought that was super important for me to be effective at work. And I still believe that. But yeah, early on, that was probably a little less true. And then as we've scaled and now we have young kids and I want to be sure to be present with them, it's become more true. And it's also just changed my schedule. Like I will be with them from 5 to 7 and then go back online and work after they go to bed. And I do that every night because I want to spend those couple hours with them and not be working. And we've created a culture where that's okay for other people too. And it's the culture I want for myself. And I think it's attractive to other young parents that want to be present with their kids in the few hours you have during the workday.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have, I think the I feel the same way, and I think as you grow the family and grow your company and have more resources, you can do more of that. But I think, at least for me, I think in those early days, there is a generation of founders now that hear only back part of that story of like what it is today. And they're like, well, that's what I should have now. Like that, I just started, I've got no company, no product, no nothing, but I should actually have all the time to, like,
When you say that, because I was looking back at my old weekly emails, and a lot of those would get sent at like 1 a.m.
yeah, exactly.
Right. And I would never do that for a lot of reasons. I would never do that today. But yes, it was very different. It was very different.
What is it at your core that motivates you? Like really, like deep down. Obviously you care a lot about food, but like, what drives you to keep building this business, this company, and putting your life into it? Like, what is that drives you?
That's a deep question. I don't know if I know the answer to that. I've asked myself that. What gets me up in the morning? Um, I think part of it is that we set a goal for ourselves to build a great, long lasting company. And maybe we can never achieve that goal. Maybe that will be kind of forever out of our hands or just out of reach rather. Um, and I think that's probably it. It's like, I still don't think we have achieved that. We have so much more to do. At some point we'll seek liquidity. And I think that will be a huge milestone for us. And so I think it's achieving that big goal that initially I set for myself, and now have promised to hundreds and hundreds of people and thousands of families. If you think about all the team members that work here, the team members that used to work here, their partners, their kids, all of our investors, uh, I feel a responsibility to achieving that vision. And I think probably more than anything, that's what gets me up and gets me going.
Knowing everything you know today, all the time in your whole career before even Tovala, knowing all that, what advice would you give yourself when you're starting out your career before your first job? What advice would you give yourself?
I think I would tell myself that it's going to work out, because I had a lot of anxiety early on that I knew I wanted to start my own company. I didn't know how that would happen. I didn't know what I wanted it to be. I didn't know how I would get it off the ground. And I remember just, I would travel for fun and be in the back of my head, like, I should be starting a company. How am I going to get a company off the ground? Maybe I shouldn't be, traveling the world when I'm 21. I should be doing something else. And uh, if I could tell that 21-year-old or 22-year-old, like, don't worry, you could spend another 4 weeks backpacking and staying in hostels, I would. Um, and then as I kind of fast forward through this journey, like, whether it's the story I shared with you or many of the other ones where we just got punched in the mouth and it looked like things were really gloomy and we wouldn't figure it out. And we did. And that persistence paid off and has paid off for us, and it's worked out. And even now I should probably give myself that advice as I look to the future. I'm like, well, 17 things might go wrong in the next 12 months and who knows where Tovala is going to be sitting. But if it's anything like the last 15, 20 years of my life, it'll work out.
I really like that advice. I think for, most of the people listening to this most of them are first time founders or people who want to be founders. And I really think it is important especially early in your life, not to rush.
Correct.
21 years old, I actually wish I had planned to do that and go backpack and go stay in all these hostels. And then I got this job and I was like, well, the only way I'm going to be able to build my career is if I take this first job, and you realize you're never going to have those experiences, which by the way, play into your career and your life and everything. So I love that. I love that advice. Awesome. David, thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation. I'm happy Nick put us in touch originally, and I learned a lot in this conversation. So thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you. It was a ton of fun.
Awesome. Well, hopefully everyone listening, hopefully you enjoyed. If you did, like, subscribe, share this with your community and your networks, and look forward to seeing you on the next episode. So thank you very much. That's a wrap for this week's episode of Not Another CEO Podcast. Thanks for joining. For show notes and more, please visit notanotherceopodcast.com. We'll see you next week.